Good evening, everybody. I, Ms. Shwatamri Borare, moderator for this evening, welcome you all on behalf of Shan and Kakachi Engineering College, Mumbai, India. We at SAKEC Research Cell would take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you present here today for this hybrid webinar series, Innovative and Emerging Technology in the Field of Research, which is hosted in collaboration with over 25 plus national and international partners. I would especially like to make a mention of our international collaborator, University of North America, to make this webinar happen. With great pleasure, I would like to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Ali Mehrabi, and he's going to talk on innovation in medical instruments and device. Dr. Ali is Principal Regulatory Affairs Subject Matter Expert at Smith's Medical College, Maryland. He has a PhD in electrical engineering with over 35 years of hands-on industry experience in the wide range of areas, including the research and development, product design and development, hardware and software, analog and digital electronics, embedded systems, digital signal processing, control system, radar, sonar, ultrasonic, telecommunication, antennas, microwave, verification and validation, test engineering, etc. In addition to that, Dr. Mehrabi has over 25 years of medical device industry experience in the research and development and product development, as well as in regulatory affairs and quality systems, plus 23 years of teaching experience as a dean and professor teaching graduate and undergraduate classes at many universities across United States. He has been with the University of North America from the beginning and is currently teaching graduate level classes in the university. With the expertise he holds, I'm sure everyone is waiting to hear from him. Now, a note to my attendees, if you have any queries or any doubts that you want to ask to our speaker, you can put that in the chat box. We will be answering at the end, towards the end of the session. The most frequently will be answered. Now, handing over to you, sir.
Dr. Mehrabi, you are live. You are on mute.
Sir, your microphone is on mute. Sir, can you share your screen, please?
I'm trying to do that. Do you see my screen?
Okay. Not yet.
You see it now?
Yes, it's coming. Perfect.
We all can see it now.
Yes, sir. You
Very
can
good.
go on.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be able to present tonight to all of you. When I was first asked to make this presentation, I was thinking about presenting something in the technical field, as I heard that most of you are engineering students. But I've been in this medical device and regulatory business for over 25 years, and I thought with some discussion that has been underway at the University of North America to create a program in the graduate level addressing the medical device regulation around the world. I thought this would be a very good topic. I often get asked from students, what would be a better field for me to pursue? You know, some people go to IT programs, some people go to software engineering, some go to hardware engineering. And I thought this would be an amazing opportunity to discuss this with all of you, to let you all know that there is also another field, which is medical device design and regulation, with a never-ending basically opportunity with a very high income, pretty much guaranteed placement, job placement for an indefinite time to come. So let me start this presentation. In this presentation, I have a short introduction, then I discuss international regulation, medical device regulation, and talk about standards, international standards that regulatory bodies expect medical device companies to comply with. And then I have a conclusion, and we'll discuss the future of this business. So let me start by asking, what is an advanced electronic devices? You know, these days, pretty much everything is dependent on electronics and software. You look at your cell phone, you look at televisions, computers, camcorders, gaming boxes, you know, you name it. I mean, there is just an infinite number of examples of these devices. Electronics is such a fundamental area today that pretty much every other field is affected by electronics. Even if you are a good architect, you use computers and software. It is why did you use in military, in civilian, in medical, in education, and these are all pretty advanced devices. If you look at your phone is a pretty sophisticated devices. Oftentimes I ask my students in my classes, why do we call this a phone? Because at the beginning it was designed as a phone, but now it's a GPS, it's a navigation system, it's a camcorder, it's a camera, it's a music player, it's a communicator. I mean, it is so many different things in one device. And these devices are so reliable. I have dropped my phones often on concrete, on asphalt. You take the phone, it is scratched, and perhaps, you know, the screen might be shattered, but you pick up the phone and the phone still works. You can make calls, you can take pictures. So these are very sophisticated, reliable devices. I do remember, you know, when I received my BS degree in 1981, and I built my first computer in 1978. I feel very fortunate that I lived through the evolution of computing. At that time, we had 8-bit computers like Apple II, Commodore, Sinclair, Atari, and these were 8-bit computers, microcomputers. I do remember the first computer that I put together had a 8-inch floppy drive. Most of you probably don't even, may not know even what the floppy drive is, but it looks like an X-ray film that you have to put it in a floppy drive compartment. It was single-sided and 100 kilobyte. It had 100 kilobyte capacity. And nowadays you see that you have a tiny jump drive that has a 1 terabyte capacity. So things have changed dramatically. And as I mentioned, if you look at television today, I mean, TVs used to use CRT, high voltage, very expensive, very heavy. The quality of the picture was not even close to what we have today. Today we're dealing with 4K and 8K digital quality pictures. And these are very sophisticated devices. However, these devices are not medical devices. So there is a difference, big difference between a medical device and all these sophisticated electronic devices. So what is the difference between the two? You know, many of these medical devices are designed by people who came from the same industry, who were designers of the phones who were designers of the televisions and other stuff, and now they are medical device designers. But there is a fundamental difference between designing a medical device versus designing just a phone, for example, or a camcorder or a television. So let's look at and see what those differences are. I'm not going to go through all these definitions, but this is a definition of a medical device from the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA. That a medical device is an instrument or a machine that either delivers therapy or diagnoses something or helps with a medical condition, breathing. It may help your heart. People who have weak heart, they may have pacemakers or defibrillators. They may be using, orthopedic people who need to have physical therapy due to an accident or something. So there is a variety of medical devices on the market. And so this is basically the definition of a medical device. That it is something that either is used to diagnose a problem, medical problem, or deliver a therapy or help with some of that stuff. So the main difference between medical device and advanced electronic devices is that medical devices are highly regulated. Advanced electronic devices may or may not be regulated, and if they are, they're lightly regulated. So let's talk about this and see what we're talking about. Regulation means that before you can place a medical device, for example, on the US and global market, this device has to go through some very rigorous evaluation to make sure that this device is safe and effective. Safe means it will guarantee that it will not hurt the user or the patient. And effective means that this device can deliver its intended use. Intended use might be ventilation. These days, with this coronavirus, there is a big shortage of ventilators, and there's a big use of ventilators because all these people who are developing these pneumonia and other illnesses, lung related, they need to breathe. They're going to have a hard time breathing, and we use ventilators to help them breathe. So these devices have to be regulated in global market. Global market means US, means Europe, means India, means China, means Canada, means Brazil, and other countries around the world. So regulation means that it's mandatory. So if for each country, we have different kind of regulations. We have in US, we have FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, that oversees the aviation, aircrafts, passenger planes, other planes. And there are other regulatory bodies also, but there is a big regulatory body in every country regulating medical devices, just to ensure that these devices are safe and effective. Let me also mention that some other electronic devices might be somewhat regulated. Like if you look at television, television has to broadcast at a specific frequency. So if you as an electronic engineer decide to say, hey, you know what, I would like to build a transmitter and play with this stuff and learn, you will be required to operate in a certain band of frequency. You cannot go and build a transmitter around the FM radio frequency or television, because that will interfere with the existing radio and television stations. But FCC, Federal Communication Commission, has allocated a specific band for each use. And if you're a radio amateur trying to learn and experiment with these things, there is a certain band of frequency that you can use. And there's a certain amount of power that you can generate. You cannot just go and say, I want to build a 50 kilowatt transmitter. That's not acceptable. The maximum that you can do, for example, is 2 kilowatt for a very advanced radio amateur who's been in business for a long time. And then you have to operate in that specific frequency. But medical devices regulation is different. They have to be extensively evaluated to make sure that they're safe and effective. In this slide, you see some examples of medical devices that I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. The first one you see at the top is a blood pressure monitor we all use to measure people's blood pressure. Defibrillators are used for people who have issues and difficulty with their hearts. So, sometimes people have a sudden cardiac arrest, and the way to help them immediately would be to use a defibrillator to reset their body's electrical system. Our body has an electrical system, and when it goes out of sync, then you have a cardiac arrest. And in that case, you need to restart the electrical system of the body and use a defibrillator. Some defibrillators are implantable for people who have continuous problem with their electrical system, their heart electrical system. They implant a small defibrillator near their heart, which detects and monitors the activity of their hearts, and if needed, it will restart their electrical system. The next one at the top right is a ventilator. A ventilator is a device that, as I mentioned, it helps people to breathe. Sometimes people have they need complete help. For example, if someone had an accident and is unconscious, they may stop breathing, so a ventilator will help. In the case of right now, for example, with this coronavirus, it affects people's lungs, so people have difficulty breathing. The ventilator will push air into their lung, and they're much more sophisticated than just pushing air into their lungs. Some people have weak lungs, and if you let the lung completely collapse, it may never open anymore. So these ventilators will keep the lung open at a certain level all the time. So this is one device that is mentioned today in this coronavirus time, and you see that without this device, many people can lose their lives. So this is a very important life-saving device. Other devices at the bottom, you see an infusion pump. Well, people, let's say, for example, people with diabetes type 1 who need insulin, they may use a pump like that injects insulin into their body. It could be other drugs that may have to be injected to people's body, and they use infusion pumps and drug delivery pumps. So that's another type of medical device. A very common that some of you might have seen in clinics and hospitals is pulse oximeter that measures the oxygen level and carbon monoxide in your body. Carbon dioxide in your body. The next one at the bottom is a patient monitoring system. If you go to emergency room or hospitals, when there is a patient, they want to monitor their blood pressure, their heart rhythm, their pulse, and other vital signs. So this is another device. But there are hundreds of other devices as well that are among medical devices. Devices such as X-ray equipment, like MRI machines, like CT scans, CT scanners, like dental equipment, like even contact lenses are considered, medical devices. Of course, the focus of today's discussion is electronic medical devices, but there are hundreds of other examples of medical devices that exist on the market. Some of the major medical devices around the world, the biggest one, Medtronic, about $30 billion business every year. It's a US-based company. Johnson & Johnson is the largest medical company in the world, around $89 billion a year business. $27 billion of which is medical devices. The rest of it is drugs and other things. Abbott, General Electric, GE Healthcare, Philips, and others, Siemens, Draeger. There's so many different medical devices around the globe, and these are some examples of those companies. It is a staggering number as the international medical device market in 2020 was over $440 billion, which was an increase of about 6.4% within just 4 years. As you can see, this is a huge market. Now, the reason that I decided to have this discussion today is that students always ask me, again, as I said, what field is best to study? Well, we know that IT is a hot topic and hot area these days to study because we're becoming more and more dependent on computers and computing and networks. But another field, which is medical device, is a very large, never-ending market. It just gets bigger and bigger, and as you can see, it is increasing by a dramatic rate of 6.4% within just 4 years. Just to give you an example, in the United States, if you decide to design a device and then have it marketed in the United States, well, you can have two types of evaluation. If your device is, well, let me back off. There are 3 classes in the United States of medical devices. Class 1 is basic stuff like tubing for a ventilator, could be, some basic stuff that is not very sophisticated, very simple. Class 2 devices are much more involved devices. A defibrillator can be device class 2 or 3. A ventilator can be class 2 or 3. And then class 3 devices are usually life-supporting, life-sustaining devices. So let's say, for example, you design a device and you decide to put it on US market. This device has to be submitted to the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA. And they have an extensive procedure to evaluate this device. They evaluate the device in every aspect. They want to make sure it's safe as far as electrical safety and electromagnetic field compatibility. It doesn't produce, safe. That means it has to be safe itself. It should not shock you. It should not cause any problem for the user or the patient. But also it should be safe against other devices. So if you are in a operating room and you have a medical device yourself, and then there are other medical devices, your device should not cause signals that can affect the operation of other devices and interrupt the other device's operation. So also your device, if the device is touching the patient's body, it has to be cleared through biocompatibility study, making sure that, some people are allergic to plastics, some people are allergic to different materials. They have to make sure that if this device is touching patient's skin, it doesn't cause allergic reaction that sometimes could be very severe. It could be fatal. Sometimes you can have allergic reaction and may stop breathing because of that. Other things, labeling, for example, the instruction for use for the device. Is it very clear how to use this device? Does it have clear warnings and caution signs? Don't do this, do this, and all that stuff. These are very important things. So when you put together a submission for a medical device, you have to include all these different areas, a very elaborate study. In most cases, clinical study. Clinical study means that you have tested your device against animals, or on people, and with a very large sample. Of course, that has to be agreed with the US Food and Drug Administration at the beginning. You tell them that I want to do a clinical study, and they say, okay, no problems. Let's try 500. Let's put together a package. Let's try this thing for 500 times at these specific clinics on these specific patient category. Where could be infants, could be young, could be older people, could be people with chronic diseases and illnesses, so that we can have a good data so that we can decide that this device is safe and effective on every patient population, for example. So making that story short, so there's a lot of stuff that you have to address in a submission. We have a process in the United States called 510K. 510K refers to a section of the US law, section 500, A, B, C, D, and K. K means if you can prove that your device is similar, we call it substantially equivalent to an existing approved device on US market, then you may apply for a 510K. The fee is only $11,500 or $600. This fee was doubled. It was half of that 2 years ago, and I'm sure that every year it'll go up. If you have a brand new innovative device that has not been on the market, there is no similar or equivalent device on the market, or it might be a class 3. A class 3 would be a life-sustaining or life-supporting device. Then you have to go through a process called PMA, pre-market approval. And that process costs $340,000. So just think about this, for example. To submit something like that, you really need to be a large medical device company, because small companies don't have that kind of capital to invest. So big companies like Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Philips, GE, and all the others, they can afford to do something like that. But the reason I mentioned this, I wanted to bring it to your attention of how much money is being spent on each submission to just get the clearance to have your device on US, Canada, Europe, and other countries' market, India, China, Brazil, Australia. So what's so critical about these devices? As I mentioned, the key is that you have to prove, you as the medical device designer, the company, has to prove that these devices are safe and effective. So what does that mean? That means that, assume that I was a very experienced electronic designer working for Apple, designing iPads and iPhones or Samsung or LG or Sony or others. Well, they're going to ask me, can you design a medical device that does this? I say, yes, I can. But that's not enough, because I need to fully understand that unlike other devices, these devices have to be safe and effective. So that safety and effectiveness should be on my mind from the time I sit down and start designing the device. You cannot design a device and say, well, my design is complete, and now let me go back and put safety and effectiveness to it. It doesn't work that way. So that's it. That requires a new mindset. So that means people have to be trained in advance to fully understand what that safety and effectiveness means. This is an example of global regulation, medical device regulation. We have EU MDR, European Union medical device regulation, which actually, they had something called MDD, medical device directives. The difference between directive and regulation is that directives are not mandatory. They encourage you to do that, but they're not mandatory. Regulation means it's mandatory. That means you must do that, or you will not be able to put your device on that market. If you do it without regulation, they come and get you, put you in jail, and there is major fines for people who violate that. In US, we have FDA, which is Food US Food and Drug Administration. In Canada, we have Health Canada. In China, we have CFDA. In Brazil, in Japan, in India, in Australia, in other countries, we have similar bodies, some of whom follow FDA's guidelines, and some others who may follow the European Union's EU MDR guidelines, and some have some of both with some variations. For example, China has their own additional requirements as well. Health Canada pretty much, in most cases, follows US FDA, and in some cases they're different. Their device classification is different. As I mentioned, in US we have three classes of devices. Class 1, which is the least riskier devices. Class 2, which is mid-range, and Class 3, which are high-risk devices. In Canada, they have 4 categories. They have divided, they say, well, 3 is not enough. So they have Class 1, 2, 3, and 4. In Europe, they have 4 classes, Class 1, Class 2A, Class 2B, and Class 3 also, and other countries also similar guidelines. Within the requirements where all these regulatory bodies, FDA, EU MDR, and others, consider are international standards. There are hundreds of international standards. Some are ISO, some are IEC, some are AMI, ANSI. They're different kind of standards, and each one has so many standards under its umbrella. For example, ISO, some of you might have heard this here, ISO 9000, quality management system. Most manufacturing sites must have that compliance, otherwise they will not be able to operate. We have ISO 13485, which is also quality management systems for medical devices, which is a bit more extended and rigorous than just the basic 9001. We have ISO 14, there is a typo here, it's 971. That's the risk management for medical devices. What is risk management? I will make a very short explanation of risk management. You leave the house, you want to go to school. What are the risks of you not making it to school? If you're taking a bus, you may miss the bus. If you are going on foot, there might be traffic, there might be other issues. So there is a risk management. That risk does not necessarily means harm to people. It could mean the risk means any causes that can stop you from reaching your goals. In medical devices, of course, extensive risk management, because we want to make sure that they're safe and effective. So we take every possible scenario. For example, can this device shock the patient? Can this device cause allergic reaction? Can this device produce unwanted or unnecessary magnetic fields? All of these are examples of different scenarios that medical device companies have to go and evaluate before they can submit their documents. Similarly, IEC standards, we have the IEC 60601-1, it's electrical safety standards, it's international. IEC 60601-1-2 is electromagnetic field compatibility, disturbances, and others. IEC 60601-1-3 regulates or is a standard that oversees X-ray equipment, for example, and similar other standards also are in use. So medical device companies are not required, but they most likely, I would say most cases, and I've been in this business for 25 years, they all follow these standards because regulatory bodies tell them that if you comply with these standards, we think that you have taken the first step and we feel like you are probably safe and effective. You have proven your safety and effectiveness, but we're going to go through your documents to just make sure that just the compliance with the standard may not be sufficient. So standards are very important for medical device companies to follow. Now, I have 6 more minutes, I believe, to talk, and I want to just make sure that I deliver the message. So why did I choose this topic? My core of my background is electrical engineering, and I've been in this business for over 35 years. I've been a design engineer from the beginning. I have very wide range of experience in many different areas of electrical engineering, and I love it, and it's very fascinating. I feel like there is a great need for all these electronics and electrical engineering skills for, I would say, forever. But the reason I picked up this topic is that we at the University of North America have been discussing for the past several years to add a graduate level program on medical device regulation, because a program like this does not really exist anywhere. There are just a few programs that are called regulation, but they're not quite what we intend to do. The reason that we have considered this program is because, first of all, this is an endless market. As I showed you, in 2020, there is $440 billion market. There is a shortage of trained personnel. So if you complete a master's degree in medical device regulation, you learn all that regulation, and then you're ready to go to the industry and help all these medical device companies to put together their documents and submit it to the regulatory bodies to get clearance so that they can put their devices on the market. Just envision having a master's program with 10, 12 courses dedicated to teaching you US and global regulatory, and of course some including some courses perhaps to explain medical devices and a bigger extension of what I just covered. These are very high income jobs. Example I want to give you, for example, if you are an experienced someone with like 10 years, 5 years, 6 years experience in regulatory, they pay you $120 an hour, $150 an hour in US and other places. And that's $200,000 to $300,000 a year income, which is hard to match in other businesses. So I want to encourage all these students, all you guys, and that just consider this, please. If you need to communicate with us, I will provide my email address. You can also reach our school and with your questions. We're seriously considering to include this program in our curriculum, and I feel like this would be a guaranteed job placement and high income. And one other thing is that this is a very rewarding work. Sometimes you choose a field that I don't know. I mean, let's say, for example, IT is a great field, but you are an experienced IT person. You're helping all these companies with their IT needs, stuff like that. But we don't know. I mean, depends on what these companies do. You may like what they do. You may not like what they do. But this business is very peaceful because what you do contributes to public health and can save lives. And it's rewarding. It's a field that you feel very good about doing. The conclusions, as I mentioned, this is a very major market. I can just see it grow. I have been in this business for a long time, and it's just growing like crazy. It's expanding every year, and this will be a very good field for all of you to consider if you haven't considered the future of your education. Hopefully in the future seminars, I will be discussing some more technical topics in electronics and IT, antennas, telecommunications, networking and other things. But for the first webinar, I decided to pick up this topic because I feel like it's very important, and you don't see this kind of topic discussed very often. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope this was an interesting topic to hear. I'm ready to answer any questions that you might have at this point. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. It's definitely an interesting topic and something different from the regular IT computer science background no, generally it is there. So we have few questions, and the first one I would like to ask you is, no, before the question Q&A, I would like to welcome Mr. Kiret Udeshi, sir. He is the Director, Regional Development South Asia from the University of North America, and he is also here to answer a few questions if there are any regarding the same. So, sir, my first question is, what are new research trends in medical electronics?
Okay. So, you know, if you go back and during December of 20, well, this in 2011 and 2012, I was the principal technical project manager for a very high profile project that involved the US Navy, the Center for Disease Control in the United States, and the Food and Drug Administration. And the reason we did that was after the events of 9/11, when the Twin Towers in New York were hit by terrorists, the CDC decided to create a stockpile of urgent care medical devices, such as ventilators, defibrillators, and others. And they made several centers around the United States to have these devices available just in case, God forbid, if something else happened like that, so that they can quickly deploy these devices and save lives. So this project was to evaluate the ventilators in the CDC stockpile to just make sure that if these devices had to be used, whether they could be used as intended and could deliver as intended. So within this research, we evaluated some of the older ventilators and some of the newer ventilators, and it's amazing because we're learning everything. We're learning new stuff every day. There is digital signal processing. And look at your phone. If you go back and look at the first cell phone, what we called it the bag phone, it was designed by and introduced by Motorola. It was a big phone. It was very basic and could just make phone calls, and it was very expensive. It was analog phone, and for people who were around at that time, we remember that how expensive it was and how cumbersome it was to use those phones. Nowadays, you look at your phone, it's a tiny, very delicate, very slick looking device that, you know, a lot of people, you know, my daughter has broken several phones because she doesn't like to put a cover on it because she says this device looks gorgeous. Why do I want to put a cover on it and cover the beauty of it? But these devices now you see that they're implementing all kind of new technology. So there are many areas of technology in electronic design, digital signal processing, embedded systems, telecommunications, RF. You know, there is so many different areas. So the trend, I would say, is just follow the electronics engineering trend, which covers a very wide area of, you know, science, you know, antennas, digital signal processing, control system, analog and digital, embedded system. Embedded system is a very massive part of today's market because the devices are, an embedded system is a basic tiny computer. It's small, but a computer is a device that can make decisions. You can tell it that, hey, you know, if this happened, do that. If that happened, do this. So embedded systems are very attractive. It's software controlled. And that means that instead of changing your entire design, all you may have to do was just to rewrite the code and change the functionality of the device. So these are some, I would say these are the trend of the electronics for the medical devices.
Okay, so I had a just in continuation with the same question. I would like to ask you on a personal scale is, you mentioned that you were involved in checking if the ventilators or the defibrillators were working fine after the 9/11 attacks.
Correct.
So I wanted to know was you are completely from a technological background. So it did not hamper the situation where you were checking medical devices and giving an acceptance for it. So it did not hamper that thing, your technical background, right?
Correct. So, I have designed many medical devices myself, throughout this my career. That's how I was exposed to medical devices. But also, I remembered, in 2002, just right after the events of 9/11, I worked for a defense contractor in U.S., defense military civilian company, and we developed some search and rescue robots. Let's say, for example, in an accident where you have a lot of casualties, people are laying down on the ground, you don't know who is alive, who is not, and you have limited resources, and you don't want to waste your resources. You want to make sure that you just at least go and try to help people who are definitely alive. So for that, for example, we designed a cane. We called it a triage sensor that you could just, just like a cane, you could bring it close to people's faces and it would detect the vital signs. If this person is breathing, or if you see, heart rate or stuff like that, then you say, okay, this is, a patient is alive and I need to put some effort to save this person's life. And if someone does not, give vital signs, then you go to the next person. I was also on the other side when I was at the FDA. I was a lead reviewer, so I reviewed all these submissions, hundreds of submissions that device companies submitted to FDA for clearance. So I had to go through those things and evaluate the device to see if it was qualified to be on the U.S. market.
Mm-hmm. That's nice to know, sir. So the next question is, what are the skills needed by technical college graduate necessary for the maintenance of medical equipment?
So medical devices are just another set of electromechanical devices. And as I mentioned, there is a bit of difference on how you look at these devices. I do remember I was a senior compliance officer at the FDA at some point too. And you have to be careful, for example, the placement of components on the motherboard, on the PC board, critical components. For example, if you have a ventilator, what is the life expectancy of that pump, for example? These are higher grade components. You use higher grade components in the military. For military components, you use military grade components that are that can operate in a much wider temperature range and humidity range and all that stuff, and they're more rugged. They can last a lot longer. So some of that stuff should be also considered when designing medical devices and maintaining these medical devices as well. So if you have a medical device and has specific components on it, we have different grades of component. We have commercial, we have industrial, and we have military, for example. If the device is using industrial components with a wider frequency or temperature range or military grade, then if you're a technician or engineer maintaining these devices and that component needs to be replaced, you have to replace it with the same grade component. You cannot just put a commercial grade component in a military grade part, for example. Definitely, with all of these things, you have to have proper training. So you need to understand that this is no longer a television. This is no longer a phone. And, the level of work or the quality of work that was acceptable in basic electronic devices may not be sufficient for medical device electronics. So you have to have sufficient training to address all that.
Okay, yeah, that answers the question. Next question is, can a physician use an unapproved device in case of an emergency?
A physician is allowed to use whatever means she or he has to treat his or her patients. This means this is an individual based cases. Hey, I have a patient, I don't have access to any of these medical devices. Can I use a balloon to blow air into this patient's lung? And this is not approved, yeah, but I'm trying to save life. Yes, I can do that. But this device cannot be on a market with that condition. If the device is going to be mass produced and available for purchasing on any of the market around the world, it has to be regulated and it has to be approved. But a physician is allowed to use any means to treat his or her patients.
So it depends upon the situation that the person is going to be in.
That is correct. Oftentimes a physician may decide to, and this happens a lot in the orthopedic cases, somebody has a fractured bone or a broken bone. The doctor may decide to use, to put together something in his lab, for this specific patient, something that does not exist on the market in that form, custom made something. And yeah, he can do that or she can do that.
Okay, sir. The next question is, how does the FDA classify medical devices?
So as I mentioned before, there are three classifications of medical devices. Class 1 that are very low risk or no risk devices, such as tubings for the ventilators and power cords, stuff like that. The next levels are class 2 devices that could be very risky, ventilators, defibrillators, infusion pumps, all of these are class 2 devices. And then class 3 devices are the highest risk devices, devices that are life supporting or life sustaining devices. So an ICU ventilator might be considered a class 3 device, but a regular ventilator for someone to help breathing at home may be a class 2.
So one last question, sir, now. Is it possible to completely rebuild the human body in some time in future?
Very interesting question. I want to give you a good answer on this one. In US and many other countries, there is a requirement by the Department of Transportation on car safety. That means that each car manufacturer is required on every model of the car that they make to pull one car, not a custom-made car, just a regular car that you're selling to customers, put a dummy in there like a human being, put sensors in there and drive this car at 40 miles an hour in US and crash it into a concrete wall. And then they want to assess the damage sustained by this car to see if it's safe, for example. And in that case, well, if you make the first test and it fails, well, you're going to waste one car, do it again, make some changes, do it again, it may fail again, it may fail again. So this is a very costly procedure, especially for high-end cars. If you have a Mercedes-Benz, Lamborghini, all those high-end cars, this can be very expensive.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the US famous CEOs, chief executive officers, when he took over Chrysler Corporation, he proposed building a simulation plant. He spent $1 billion on creating a computer simulation plant that could simulate the cars on the crash. And once the test passed in the simulation, they had to do just one real test to ensure that it actually worked. So this saved billions of dollars of money. Major effort has been put together to simulate human body. The human body is a very complex machine, I would say. Every part of your body is different. If you look at your fingers, even on the same fingers from point to point, there are nerves, there are veins, there are other kind of things. If one can at some point, so there is a lot of effort is going in toward this direction right now, research. If at one point we can completely simulate human body, then that would be a point to celebrate, because at that point we can make a lot of new discoveries and predict human behavior, toward different things. And we're just not there yet, but we're making a lot of progress toward that area.
Wow, that's great to know. So with this, I thank you, sir.
One more question. No, 1 second. Dr. Mehrabi, I think you referred that in the future you can talk about IT and medical devices. As this Shine Anchor Kachi Engineering College has lots of IT students and lots of engineering students. What would you guide them in order to them to be as successful in career, whether they make it to United States or not, even in India? Any kind of your guidance on that one?
Sure. So, as of now, right now, because of high skills and also perhaps a lower labor cost in India, many US companies are they're utilizing expertise in India and other countries. And I lost your picture, Kirit. Do you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay. And so HCL, for example, is a company that is in India. It's a large company, and many US companies are using HCL to design electronic devices and help them with regulation. One of the reasons that I mentioned is, so I feel like for the first time in the past several years, I feel like we're as close as we can get to putting together a program. I did speak with our president, and she agreed that this is a great program. I spoke with the university founder, Mr. Martin, and for many years we have been talking about this. So we're hoping to implement this program soon. And of course, this program, we might be able to offer it online. I feel like a formal education where you can learn all these things, it would be amazing and a big credit to students to say, well, I have this formal training obtained at this school, and they can apply that. The program we're envisioning does not just address US regulation, it's a global regulation. So if they decide to use it in India for US for Indian medical devices, healthcare, China, other countries, they can do that. And as I mentioned, the work is very rewarding. It's very high paid. There is a big shortage of this everywhere, and students don't have to worry about finding jobs after getting this training for this program.
Thank you, Dr. Mehrabi.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So with this, I will thank you a lot for informing us about the different medical devices that are presently available and the ones we can make use of. And here is a small token of appreciation from Shahananka Kachi Engineering College to you, sir. And I would like to accept it on behalf of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.